The frigid winter wind cut across the barren plains like a knife as Tessa Greene stumbled down the wooden steps of the train, her legs nearly giving out beneath her after the grueling 5-day journey from Boston to the Wyoming Territory. It was 1878, and everything she owned was packed in the single trunk that now lay beside her on the frozen ground of Riverton Station. She had come west as a mail-order bride, answering an advertisement from a rancher who had promised a life of comfort and security promises that now seemed as empty as the desolate landscape stretching before her. Tessa clutched the crumpled letter in her gloved hand, scanning the small gathering of people at the station. There was no sign of Mr. Harold Jenkins, the man who had corresponded with her for 6 months and paid for her passage west. The station master had already announced the train would depart in 15 minutes, continuing its journey toward California. "Excuse me?" Tessa approached the weathered station master who was busy sorting mail. "I'm looking for Mr. Harold Jenkins. He was supposed to meet me here today." The station master glanced up, his expression shifting from disinterest to something resembling pity. "Jenkins? From the Double J Ranch?" "Yes, that's right," Tessa replied, hope briefly flickering in her eyes. "Miss, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Harold Jenkins passed 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick-like." The station master's voice was matter-of-fact, as if death was simply another mundane occurrence in this harsh territory. The blood drained from Tessa's face. "But he was supposed to—" Her voice faltered as the reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone, nearly penniless, in a strange town 2,000 miles from home. "The next train east doesn't come through for 4 days," the station master added, turning back to his mail. "Town's got a boarding house if you've got the means to pay." Tessa's legs began to tremble. The long journey, the meager rations, the shock of the news, it all converged at once. She felt lightheaded, the edges of her vision darkening as she took a step backward. The last thing she heard was the whistle of the departing train before her world went black. Cole Garrett was riding past the station on his way back to his ranch when he spotted the commotion. A small crowd had gathered around something or someone on the ground near the tracks. Curiosity and concern pulled him from his horse, a sturdy palomino named Whiskey. "What's happened here?" Cole asked, pushing through the onlookers. "Mail-order bride," someone muttered. "Jenkins' widow-to-be. Showed up too late." Cole kneeled beside the unconscious woman. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair escaping from beneath her bonnet. Her face was pale as the snow that dusted the mountains in the distance, but she was breathing. Without hesitation, Cole shrugged off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her slender frame. "Has anyone sent for the doctor?" he asked, looking around at the faces that seemed more interested in spectacle than assistance. "Doc Simmons is out at the Morrison place. Their boy's got the fever," the station master replied. Cole made a quick decision. "I'll take her to my ranch. It's closer than town, and my housekeeper can look after her until the doctor returns." He carefully gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed. "What's her name?" "Tessa Greene, according to her papers," the station master said, holding up an envelope that had fallen from her pocket. "And her trunk?" "I'll have my boy bring it out to your place tomorrow, Mr. Garrett." Cole nodded his thanks, then carried Tessa to his horse. With practiced ease, he mounted Whiskey while still holding her securely against his chest. As he turned his horse toward home, he looked down at the woman in his arms. She was beautiful, even in her current state, and something in him stirred a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the war. "Hold on, Miss Greene," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "I've got you now." The 7-mile ride to Garrett Ranch seemed longer than usual with the precious cargo Cole carried. The rolling hills of his property came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. His ranch house stood proudly against the backdrop of the Wind River Mountains, not as grand as some, but substantial and well-built, a testament to the 4 years of hard work he'd poured into it since returning from fighting with the Union Army. Mrs. Holloway, his housekeeper, came rushing out as he approached, her gray hair escaping from its tight bun. "Merciful heavens, Mr. Garrett, what have you got there?" "A woman who needs our help, Mrs. Holloway. She collapsed at the station. She was meant to marry Harold Jenkins, but no one told her he'd passed." The older woman's face softened with understanding. "Poor dear. Bring her inside to the guest room. I'll heat some broth and prepare a hot water bottle." Cole carried Tessa through the house to the small but comfortable guest room. He laid her gently on the bed, reluctant to let go. Mrs. Holloway bustled in behind him, already taking charge. "Out with you now, Mr. Garrett. I'll get her settled and into some dry clothes. That journey is enough to wear anyone down, let alone finding out such terrible news upon arrival." Cole nodded and stepped out, but not before taking one last look at the woman on the bed. Something about her stirred protective instincts he thought long buried. In the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the window at his land. Cole Garrett wasn't a man given to impulsive decisions. At 32, he'd survived the war, built a successful cattle ranch, and earned the respect of the community. He was self-sufficient, content with his life, or so he'd convinced himself. Mrs. Holloway's footsteps interrupted his thoughts. "She's resting now," the housekeeper reported. "Exhaustion, I'd wager, and probably hasn't had a proper meal in days. Those trains don't exactly serve quality victuals." "Did she wake at all?" "Briefly. Seemed confused, naturally. I told her she was safe, and that seemed to satisfy her for now." Mrs. Holloway studied him with knowing eyes. "What are you planning to do with her, Mr. Garrett?" Cole sipped his coffee. "Help her get back on her feet, I suppose. She can stay here until she decides what she wants to do next." Mrs. Holloway responded, in a tone that suggested she saw more than Cole was willing to admit. "I'll sleep in the room next to hers tonight, just in case she needs anything." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. You're a good woman." "And you're a good man, Cole Garrett. Even if you try to hide it behind that gruff exterior." She patted his arm affectionately before moving to stir the pot of stew simmering on the stove. Cole didn't respond. Instead, he finished his coffee and headed out to complete his evening chores. The ranch wouldn't run itself, and the work might help clear his mind of thoughts about the beautiful stranger sleeping under his roof. Tessa awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was. The room was simply but comfortably furnished, a far cry from the cramped train compartment she'd occupied for nearly a week. Then it all came rushing back. The station, the devastating news, the darkness that had claimed her. She sat up quickly, then regretted it as dizziness swept over her. "Easy now," came a gentle voice from beside the bed. Tessa turned to see an older woman with kind eyes setting down a tray on the bedside table. "Where am I?" Tessa asked, her voice hoarse. "Garrett Ranch, my dear. I'm Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper. Mr. Garrett brought you here after you collapsed at the station yesterday. You've had quite an ordeal." Tessa's hand went to her throat. "Mr. Garrett?" "Cole Garrett. He owns this ranch. One of the most respected men in the territory, though he'd never admit it." Mrs. Otpa Holloway poured a cup of tea from the pot on the tray. "Here, drink this. Then you should try to eat something." Tessa accepted the cup with trembling hands. "I don't understand. Why would he help me? We've never met." Mrs. Holloway smiled. "That's just the kind of man he is. Doesn't make a fuss about it, but he couldn't leave someone in need." She paused, her expression softening. "He told me about Mr. Jenkins. I'm very sorry, dear." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes, not for the loss of Harold Jenkins, a man she'd never even met, but for the loss of the future she'd gambled everything on. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "I spent nearly everything I had on the train ticket." "You're welcome to stay here until you get your bearings," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "Now, Try to eat some of this porridge. You need your strength. Tessa managed a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her again. As she drifted off to sleep, she wondered about the man who had rescued her, and what kind of person would offer shelter to a complete stranger. When she next awoke, the light in the room had changed, suggesting it was late afternoon. She felt stronger, the fog of exhaustion lifting. This time, when she sat up, the dizziness was manageable. A dress was laid out at the foot of the bed, simple but well made, in a soft blue fabric. Her own travel-worn clothes were nowhere to be seen. After washing with the water provided in a basin on the dresser, Tessa changed into the fresh dress. It fit reasonably well, if a bit loose around the waist, making her wonder about its previous owner. She ventured out of the bedroom, following the sound of movement to a large, warm kitchen. Mrs. Holloway was there, kneading dough on a floured table. "Well, look at you," the housekeeper said approvingly. "Some color back in your cheeks already. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. I don't know how to express my gratitude for your kindness." Mrs. Holloway waved away the thanks. "Nonsense. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Tessa pointed out softly. "Mr. Garrett did." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the kitchen door swung open and a tall man entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Cole Garrett was not what she had expected. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked his land, rather than merely owning it. His face was tanned from the sun, with strong features that might have seemed severe if not for the warmth in his hazel eyes. Dark hair, slightly too long, curled at the nape of his neck. He couldn't have been much more than 30, but there was a gravity to him that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "Miss Greene," he said, his voice deep and measured. "It's good to see you on your feet." Tessa felt suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed dress. "Mr. Garrett, I don't know how to thank you properly for your help." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No thanks necessary. I'm just glad you're recovering." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Your trunk arrived from the station. I had it brought to your room." "That's very kind, thank you." Tessa hesitated, then continued. "I won't impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. As soon as I'm able, I'll make arrangements to—" She stopped, realizing she had no clear plan. Cole and Mrs. Holloway exchanged a glance. "There's no rush," Cole assured her. "Wyoming winters are harsh, and it's nearly December. You're welcome to stay until spring if needed." "I couldn't possibly—" "It's settled then," Mrs. Holloway interjected cheerfully. "Now, Mr. Garrett, wash up. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Cole nodded and left the kitchen, but not before giving Tessa another appraising look that made her cheeks warm. Mrs. Holloway chuckled after he'd gone. "Don't mind him. He's not much for conversation, but his heart's in the right place." "The dress," Tessa began, fingering the soft fabric. "Belonged to his sister," Mrs. Holloway explained, her expression sobering. "She passed during the influenza outbreak 2 years ago. Her husband had already been lost in the war, so Cole took in their son, Timothy. He's 10 now, away at school in Cheyenne until Christmas." Tessa's heart constricted at the thought of so much loss. "I'm sorry to hear that. It was generous of Mr. Garrett to take in his nephew. Like I said, good heart." Mrs. Holloway went back to her kneading. "Now, make yourself useful and set the table if you're feeling up to it." Grateful for something to do, Tessa followed the housekeeper's directions, setting 3 places at the large oak table in the dining room. By the time Cole returned, freshly washed and changed into a clean shirt, she felt almost steady. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, still warm from the oven. The food was the most satisfying Tessa had eaten in weeks, and despite her intention to maintain proper decorum, she found herself accepting a second helping. You've got quite an appetite for someone so slight, Cole observed, though his tone held no judgment. Tessa dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. The food on the train was barely edible, I'm afraid. Where are you from originally, Miss Greene? Cole asked, surprising her with the direct question. Boston. My father was a professor at Harvard before he died last year. She didn't add that his death had left her with debts that consumed what little inheritance there might have been, or that becoming a mail-order bride had seemed the only viable option for a woman of 24 with no relatives and few marketable skills. That's quite a change, coming to Wyoming territory. Yes. Well. Tessa set down her fork. Change was what I was seeking. Cole studied her for a moment, as if trying to read the story behind her words. And now? What will you do? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Tessa had asked herself the same thing repeatedly since learning of Harold Jenkins's death. I'm not certain yet, she admitted. I have some skills as a teacher. Perhaps there's a school in need somewhere nearby. Riverton's school is fully staffed, Mrs. Holloway said, but I've heard the settlement over in Sweetwater might be looking. Cole nodded. I'll inquire when I go to town next week. He rose from the table. If you'll excuse me, I have some accounts to review before turning in. After he left, Tessa helped Mrs. Holloway clear the table and wash the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. I may be a guest, but I'm not an invalid, Tessa insisted, and I was raised to earn my keep. Mrs. Holloway smiled approvingly. You'll do well out here with that attitude. The West doesn't abide idle hands. That night, as Tessa lay in the comfortable bed, she thought about Cole Garrett. He was nothing like the image she'd formed of Harold Jenkins through their correspondence, a man nearly twice her age, who had written of wanting a proper lady to bring civilization to his ranch. Cole seemed to have civilization well in hand, from the well-appointed house to the obvious prosperity of his operation, and he was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, unpretentious way that the polished gentleman of Boston couldn't match. But there was sadness in him, too. She had seen it in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Tessa turned over, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. It would be foolish to develop any romantic notions about Cole Garrett. He had offered her shelter out of kindness, nothing more. As soon as she was able, she would find her own way and stop imposing on his generosity. With that resolution firmly in mind, she drifted off to sleep. The following days established a routine. Tessa's strength returned quickly with proper rest and Mrs. Holloway's nourishing meals. She insisted on helping with household chores, cooking, cleaning, and mending, despite the housekeeper's initial protests. I've managed this house for 4 years without assistance, Mrs. Holloway had argued. And you do it beautifully, Tessa replied, but there's no reason I can't contribute while I'm here. Cole was often absent during daylight hours, seeing to the ranch's operation. Winter was a quieter season for cattle ranching, but there was still plenty to occupy him checking on the herds, repairing equipment, and ensuring adequate feed stores for the coming months. When he was present at meals or in the evenings, he was unfailingly polite but reserved. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Tessa ventured into his study with a pot of coffee. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers, a frown of concentration on his face. I thought you might like some coffee, she said, startling him from his work. Thank you, Cole replied, clearing a space for the tray. You didn't need to do that. It's the least I can do. Tessa poured a cup and handed it to him. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you're going to town tomorrow. That's right. We need supplies, and I have business at the bank. Tessa took a breath. I was wondering if I might accompany you. I should inquire about employment opportunities, and perhaps see about arranging passage back east in the spring. Cole's expression was unreadable. Of course. We'll leave after breakfast. Thank you. She turned to go, then hesitated. I've been meaning to ask. The dress I was wearing when I arrived? Mrs. Holloway cleaned and mended it. It's in your wardrobe. And your coat, the one you wrapped me in? A slight smile crossed his face. It's seen worse than a bit of dirt, Miss Greene. Tessa nodded, suddenly flustered by his gaze. Well, thank you again. I'll let you get back to your work. She fled the study, confused by her reaction. It was merely gratitude she felt toward Cole Garrett, she told herself. Nothing more. The next morning dawned clear but cold. Tessa dressed in her own clothes, now clean and pressed, and added a thick wool shawl borrowed from Mrs. Holloway's supplies. Cole was waiting by the wagon when she emerged from the house. It's a 40-minute ride to town, he said, helping her up onto the seat. The blanket there will keep you warm. The journey passed mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Tessa found herself stealing glances at Cole's profile as he drove the strong line of his jaw. The way his eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert for any sign of trouble. Riverton was smaller than Tessa had expected, a single main street lined with the essential businesses of frontier life: general store, bank, saloon, hotel, and church. There were perhaps 24 buildings in all. Not quite Boston, Cole commented, noticing her assessment. No, she agreed. But it has a certain charm. He helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store. I need to see to my business at the bank. Will you be all right exploring on your own? We can meet back here in an hour. Of course. I'd like to inquire at the hotel about positions. Cole nodded and strode off toward the bank, his long legs carrying him quickly down the boardwalk. Tessa straightened her shoulders and headed for the Riverton Hotel, a 2-story building that looked to be the most substantial structure in town after the bank. Inside, she approached the desk where a middle-aged woman was sorting through mail. Excuse me, Tessa began. I was wondering if you might be hiring staff. The woman looked up, assessing Tessa with shrewd eyes. Looking for work, are you? We've got a full complement of maids at present. I see. Thank you anyway. As Tessa turned to leave, the woman added, You might try the millinery shop. Mrs. Everett mentioned needing help with the holiday rush. Hope rising. Tessa thanked her and found her way to the small shop displaying bonnets and hats in its window. Inside, a harried-looking woman was attempting to serve 3 customers at once. Oh, another customer! The woman exclaimed upon seeing Tessa. I'll be with you as soon as I can. Actually, Tessa replied, I heard you might be looking for help. Mrs. Everett's face lit up. Heaven sent you are. Can you start tomorrow? Tessa hesitated. I'm staying at Garrett Ranch currently. I'm not sure about transportation. Garrett Ranch? Mrs. Everett's eyebrows rose. Cole Garrett's place? Yes. He kindly offered me accommodation when I arrived last week. The shopkeeper exchanged meaningful glances with her customers, making Tessa uncomfortable. I'm only staying temporarily, she clarified, until I can establish myself. Of course, dear, Mrs. Everett said, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe it. Well, if you can manage the journey, I can offer you 3 days a week, Tuesday through Thursday. The pay is modest, but fair. That would be wonderful, thank you. Tessa was grateful for the opportunity, even if it wasn't what she had initially envisioned for herself. I'll speak with Mr. Garrett about transportation arrangements. She left the shop with a lighter heart, pleased to have secured employment so quickly. Her next stop was the post office, where she mailed a letter to her former neighbor in Boston, explaining her changed circumstances and asking if there might be teaching positions available for the following autumn. By the time she returned to the general store, Cole was already loading supplies into the wagon. Any luck? He asked as she approached. Yes, actually. Mrs. Everett at the millinery shop has offered me a position, 3 days a week. Cole nodded, though his expression was difficult to read. Good. I can bring you to town on those days. It's on my regular route. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to disrupt your schedule. It's no disruption. he said firmly, helping her up onto the wagon seat. Besides, winter's coming on strong. It's not safe for you to make the journey alone. As if to emphasize his point, the wind picked up, cutting through Tessa's shawl. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders gratefully. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the ride. Cole's eyes met hers briefly, something unspoken passing between them before he turned his attention back to the horses. The sun was setting as they returned to the ranch, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that took Tessa's breath away. The beauty of this wild country was unlike anything she'd experienced in the East. "It's magnificent," she murmured, gazing at the landscape. Cole followed her gaze. "It is. I never tire of it." "Have you always lived here?" Tessa asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about him. "No. I came west after the war, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, then bought this land in '74. There was pride in his voice when he spoke of his ranch. "What about you? What brought you to answer an advertisement from a stranger in Wyoming territory?" The directness of the question caught Tessa off guard. She considered giving the polite, sanitized version she'd prepared for curious strangers, but something about Cole's honest interest made her want to respond in kind. "Necessity, primarily," she admitted. "After my father died, I discovered he had accumulated significant debts. The house had to be sold, along with most of our possessions. I had been sheltered, educated only in the ornamental subjects considered suitable for a lady. I tried working as a governess, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to revisit the humiliation of that experience. "So you decided to marry a man you'd never met." There was no judgment in his tone, but Tessa felt defensive nonetheless. "It was a practical arrangement. Mr. Jenkins wanted a wife to manage his household and provide companionship. I wanted security and a fresh start. The West seemed to offer opportunities that Boston could not." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Jenkins was a decent man, set in his ways but fair. He would have treated you well." "I believe that," Tessa said softly. "His letters were kind and respectful." They lapsed into silence for the remainder of the journey, but it was a comfortable one, filled with shared understanding rather than awkwardness. When they reached the ranch, Cole helped Tessa down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Thank you for today," she said, suddenly breathless. He stepped back, breaking the spell. "You're welcome. I'll unhitch the horses while you go inside. It's getting cold." Tessa nodded and hurried into the house, her heart racing from more than just the chill in the air. Mrs. Holloway looked up from the stove as she entered. "How is town? You look flushed." "It's just the wind," Tessa replied quickly. "And I have good news. I've found employment at the millinery shop." As she shared the details with the housekeeper, Tessa tried to ignore the lingering sensation of Cole's hands at her waist and the strange fluttering in her stomach whenever she thought of him. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. 3 days a week, Cole would drive Tessa to town for her work at the millinery shop, where she quickly proved herself adept at both customer service and the creative aspects of hat making. The other days, she helped Mrs. Holloway with household tasks and spent time exploring the ranch's extensive library, a collection that spoke of Cole's surprisingly diverse interests. December brought heavier snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas. With Christmas approaching, the ranch took on a festive atmosphere, especially with the news that Timothy would be returning from school for the holiday. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Holloway told Tessa as they hung pine boughs along the staircase. "Smart as a whip, like his mother was. He's had a hard time of it, losing both parents so young, but Mr. Garrett has been solid as a rock for him." "Cole seems very devoted to his nephew," Tessa observed, using his first name as she had begun to do in her thoughts, though she still addressed him formally. Those two are thick as thieves. Mr. Garrett may not say much, but that boy knows he's loved. Mrs. Holloway adjusted a sprig of holly. It'll do him good to have another face at the table this Christmas. Last year was a somber affair, what with it being the first holiday after his mother's passing. Tessa felt a pang of sympathy for the boy she had yet to meet. She knew all too well the hollow ache of spending holidays without loved ones. 2 days before Christmas, Cole departed for Cheyenne to collect Timothy from school. They would be gone overnight, returning on Christmas Eve. Weather permitting, Cole had said before leaving, his eyes on the gathering clouds. If we're delayed, don't worry. We'll find shelter along the way. But Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, and by mid-afternoon, Tessa found herself watching the road anxiously for signs of the returning travelers. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a special dinner, and the house was decorated with evergreen boughs, holly, and candles. "They'll be here," Mrs. Holloway assured her, noticing Tessa's frequent glances out the window. "Mr. Garrett knows this country like the back of his hand." Just as the sun began to set, Tessa spotted movement on the road leading to the ranch. She hurried to the door, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she stepped onto the porch. Cole's wagon appeared, moving at a steady pace despite the snow-covered ground. As it drew closer, Tessa could make out a small figure beside him, Timothy, she presumed. She waited on the porch, suddenly nervous about meeting Cole's nephew. What if the boy resented her presence in what had been his family home? The wagon pulled up to the house, and Cole jumped down, reaching back to help a lanky, dark-haired boy descend. "Miss Greene," Cole called, his breath visible in the cold air. "Come meet Timothy." Tessa approached, smiling warmly. "Hello, Timothy. I'm very glad to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about you." The boy regarded her with solemn eyes that reminded her of his uncle's. "Hello, Miss Greene. Uncle Cole told me you're staying with us for a while." "That's right. Your uncle and Mrs. Holloway have been very kind to me." Timothy nodded, seeming to accept this. "Do you like books? Uncle Cole says you spend a lot of time in the library." "I love books," Tessa confirmed. "Perhaps you could show me your favorites while you're home?" A smile transformed the boy's serious face. "Yes, madam. I got a new one at school about explorers in Africa." "That sounds fascinating. I'd love to hear about it." Cole watched this exchange with an expression Tessa couldn't quite interpret: relief, perhaps, or something deeper. "Let's get inside," he said, placing a hand on Timothy's shoulder. "It's freezing out here, and I smell Mrs. Holloway's cooking." The Christmas Eve dinner was the most joyful meal Tessa had experienced in years. Timothy, initially reserved, soon warmed up and regaled them with stories from school. Cole was more relaxed than Tessa had ever seen him, laughing at his nephew's tales and sharing a few of his own from Timothy's age. After dinner, they gathered in the parlor where a small pine tree had been decorated with paper ornaments and candles. Mrs. Holloway produced a fiddle, surprising Tessa with her skill as she played traditional carols. "Your turn, Uncle Cole," Timothy insisted when Mrs. Holloway set down the instrument. Cole shook his head. "Not tonight, Tim." "Please?" the boy pleaded. "Miss Greene hasn't heard you sing." Tessa looked between them, curious. "You sing, Mr. Garrett?" "Barely," Cole demurred, but at Timothy's continued insistence he finally relented. When he began to sing Silent Night, Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. His voice was deep and rich, untrained but true, and filled with a quiet emotion that touched something deep within her. Later, as Timothy was sent to bed with promises that Christmas morning would come sooner if he slept, Tessa found herself alone with Cole in the parlor. Mrs. Holloway had retired, claiming her old bones needed rest before the excitement tomorrow. "Your nephew is wonderful," Tessa said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "You've done a remarkable job with him." Cole stared into the fire. "He makes it easy. He's resilient, like his mother was." "He seems happy here with you." "I hope so." Cole turned to look at her. He likes you. I can tell. Tessa felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. I like him too. Very much. They sat in silence for another moment before Cole spoke again. I have something for you. For Christmas. Oh, but I wasn't expecting anything in return. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It's nothing elaborate. Tessa accepted the package, touched by the unexpected gesture. Carefully, she untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. I noticed you reading her work from my library, Cole explained. This edition just came into the bookshop in Cheyenne. Tessa ran her fingers over the embossed cover, moved beyond words by his thoughtfulness. It's perfect, she managed finally. Thank you. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Cole's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a moment Tessa thought he might lean forward. Instead, he stood abruptly. It's late. You should get some rest. Timothy will have us all up at dawn. Confused by the sudden change, Tessa rose as well. Yes, of course. Good night, Mr. Garrett. Good night, Miss Greene. His voice was gentle but distant, and as Tessa climbed the stairs to her room, she wondered if she had imagined the connection she'd felt growing between them. Christmas morning brought the joy and chaos that accompanies any holiday with a child present. Timothy was indeed up at dawn, his excitement infectious as he roused the household to open the gifts arranged beneath the small tree. Tessa had managed to fashion simple presents using materials from the ranch, a hand-knitted scarf for Mrs. Holloway, a leather bookmark she had tooled for Timothy, and for Cole, a sketch she had drawn of his beloved ranch house at sunset. It wasn't much, but the genuine appreciation with which her gifts were received made her heart full. The day passed in a blur of good food, games, and laughter. By evening, a comfortable exhaustion had settled over the household. Timothy, worn out from his early rising and the excitement of the day, retired soon after dinner. Mrs. Holloway followed not long after, leaving Tessa and Cole alone once more. Would you like to take a short walk? Cole asked unexpectedly. The night is clear and the stars are something to behold after a snow. Surprised but pleased, Tessa agreed. They bundled up against the cold and stepped out onto the porch. The world was transformed by moonlight on fresh snow, every surface glittering as if dusted with diamonds. Cole led her a short distance from the house to a small rise that offered a view of the entire ranch and the mountains beyond. Above them, the sky was a vast canopy of stars, more than Tessa had ever seen in Boston's light-polluted skies. It's breathtaking, she whispered, afraid to break the spell of the moment. Yes, Cole agreed, though when she turned she found him looking at her rather than the stars. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. Cole raised a hand to her cheek, his fingers warm against her cold skin. Tessa, he said, using her first name for the first time. I find myself thinking about you far more than is proper for a man offering temporary shelter to a woman in need. Her heart raced at his admission. And I find myself thinking of you in ways that have nothing to do with gratitude for your kindness. A smile touched his lips before he leaned down and kissed her, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer against the cold. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, their breath visible in the frosty air. I didn't plan for this, Cole said, his forehead resting against hers. I didn't expect to feel this way again. Nor did I, Tessa admitted. I came west looking for security, not... She trailed off, unsure how to define what was blossoming between them. Not this, Cole finished for her. He stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of her hand. I don't want to rush you, Tessa. You came here with certain expectations. And they've all been upended. I understand if you need time. Tessa squeezed his hand, touched by his consideration. I do need some time. Not because I doubt what I'm feeling, but because I want to be sure I'm making choices for the right reasons this time. Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then time is what you'll have. I've waited this long to find someone who makes me feel this way again. I can wait a bit longer. They returned to the house hand in hand, parting at the foot of the stairs with a gentle kiss that held promise rather than urgency. In her room, Tessa stood by the window, gazing out at the starlit landscape. For the first time since receiving the devastating news at the train station, she felt something like hope taking root in her heart. The days following Christmas settled into a pleasant routine. Timothy's presence brought new energy to the house, and Tessa found herself drawn into his world of books, outdoor adventures, and endless questions about life in the East. Cole was busy with ranch work but made time each evening for his nephew and, increasingly, for Tessa as well. They were careful to maintain propriety, especially in front of Timothy, but private moments a brush of hands as they passed in the hallway, a shared glance across the dinner table, brief conversations by the fire after others had retired allowed their connection to deepen. One afternoon, as Tessa helped Timothy with a particularly challenging arithmetic problem from his school assignments, the boy looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are you going to leave when spring comes?" he asked bluntly. Tessa set down her pencil, taken aback by the direct question. "I'm not certain yet, Timothy. Why do you ask?" "Uncle Cole seems happier with you here?" The boy's observation was startlingly perceptive. "Before you came, he didn't laugh much. Now he does." "Your uncle is a good man," Tessa said carefully. "He deserves to be happy." "My mama used to say he carried too much of the war inside him." Timothy looked down at his slate. "I think you help with that." Tessa was silent, moved by the boy's insight and the unexpected weight of responsibility his words placed on her shoulders. "I like having you here too," Timothy added with the directness of youth. "You explain things better than Mrs. Holloway, and you don't tell me to be quiet when I ask questions." "I enjoy your questions," Tessa assured him, ruffling his hair affectionately. "You have a curious mind. That's a gift." Timothy seemed satisfied with this response and returned to his arithmetic, but his words lingered in Tessa's mind long after. That evening, after Timothy had gone to bed, Tessa found Cole in the library, a ledger open before him on the desk. "May I interrupt?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, his expression softening at the sight of her. "Always. I was just reviewing the year's accounts." Tessa entered and took a seat in the chair across from him. "Timothy asked me today if I plan to leave in the spring." Cole's hand stilled on the ledger. "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't certain." She met his gaze directly. "It was the truth. I've been thinking about my future, but I find my plans are less clear than they once were." "Because of us?" "Partly," she admitted. "But also because I've come to love it here. The land, the work at the millinery shop, even the small community in Riverton. It's nothing like what I expected, and yet it feels like home," Cole suggested when she hesitated. "Yes. Which is strange, given how briefly I've been here." Cole set aside his pencil and closed the ledger. "Home isn't always about time, Tessa. Sometimes it's about where you feel you belong." "Do you think I belong here, Cole?" It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. Cole considered his answer carefully. "I think you could, if you wanted to. You've adapted to ranch life with more grace than most Eastern ladies would. Mrs. Holloway adores you. Timothy clearly does as well. And as for me—" He paused, searching for the right words. "As for you?" Tessa prompted softly. "I find myself hoping you'll stay, not just until spring but beyond. I know it's premature, perhaps even presumptuous, but I can't deny what I feel." Tessa's heart raced at his honesty. It's not premature to name what's between us, Cole. I feel it too. But I came west to marry a man I'd never met, driven more by necessity than choice. I don't want to make another decision based primarily on circumstances. Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. I respect that. And I want you to know that regardless of what develops between us, you have a place here for as long as you need it. No obligations, no expectations. Thank you. She reached across the desk to take his hand. That means more than I can express. He turned her hand over and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Now, he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. Tell me about your day at the shop. Mrs. Everett working you to the bone? The moment lightened, and they fell into easy conversation about town gossip and ranch matters. But beneath the ordinary exchange ran a current of understanding. They were no longer merely host and guest, but two people acknowledging the possibility of a shared future. January brought bitter cold and a series of snowstorms that made travel to town impossible for nearly 2 weeks. The forced confinement might have been tedious, but Tessa found herself treasuring the time it afforded with Cole, Timothy, and Mrs. Holloway. They spent evenings playing chess and checkers, reading aloud by the fire, and sharing stories of their pasts. Cole, typically reticent about personal matters, gradually opened up about his experiences in the war, the horrors he had witnessed, the friends he had lost, and the struggle to find purpose afterward. Ranching saved me, he told Tessa one night as they sat by the fire, long after the others had gone to bed. Working the land, watching things grow and thrive under my care, it helped heal something broken inside me. Is that why you took in Timothy? To heal another kind of brokenness? Cole considered this. Perhaps, but it wasn't a conscious decision. When Sarah died, there was never any question that he would come to me. He's family. You've built something wonderful here, Cole. A home, a successful ranch, a place where a boy can grow up feeling secure and loved. It's not complete, though, he said quietly, his eyes on the flames. It never has been. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. As January gave way to February, the weather improved enough for travel to resume. Timothy returned to school in Cheyenne, the house strangely quiet in his absence. Tessa resumed her work at the millinery shop, now 3 full days a week as Mrs. Everett's business expanded. One evening in mid-February, Cole received a visitor, Sheriff Donovan from Riverton, bearing news that changed everything. Jenkins' brother has shown up from back east, the sheriff explained as they sat around the kitchen table. Seems Harold left him the ranch in his will, but the brother had moved, and only just received word of Harold's passing. He's claiming all of Harold's property, including any arrangements he might have made. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean for me? Sheriff Donovan looked uncomfortable. According to the law, madam, any contract you had with Harold Jenkins is null and void upon his death. His brother is under no obligation to honor it. There was no formal contract, Tessa admitted. Just an exchange of letters and his payment for my travel. Then legally, you have no claim on anything that was Harold's, the sheriff confirmed. Cole, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. What's the brother like, Jim? Is he planning to work the ranch himself? Doubt it. City man through and through. Word is he's already looking to sell. And the agreement Harold had with me for grazing rights on his north pasture? All contracts would need to be renegotiated with the new owner, whether that's the brother or whoever buys the place. Cole nodded thoughtfully. Thanks for letting us know, Jim. I appreciate the heads up. After the sheriff departed, Tessa sat at the table feeling strangely numb. I never expected anything from Mr. Jenkins's estate. I didn't even know him. I know, Cole assured her, taking the seat beside her. But it does change things. If his brother sells the ranch, the new owners might not be as amenable to the arrangements many of us had with Harold. You're worried about losing the grazing rights. It's a concern, but not my primary one at the moment. Cole reached for her hand. Tessa, I know this is sudden, and I promised you time, but circumstances are forcing my hand. Her heart began to race. What do you mean? Cole took a deep breath. I've been thinking about expanding my operation. The Jenkins place would be a logical addition to my ranch. It borders my property to the north, has good water access, and I already run cattle there. If I were to purchase it— You want to buy Mr. Jenkins's ranch? Tessa tried to follow his reasoning. Yes, and I want you to stay, Tessa. Not as my guest, but as my wife. The directness of the proposal took her breath away. Cole, I know it's not the romantic proposal you deserve, he continued quickly. And I'm not asking because of convenience or circumstances. I'm asking because these past months have shown me what my life could be with you in it, and I don't want to lose that. I love you, Tessa Greene. I think I have since the moment I wrapped my coat around you at the train station. Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. Oh, Cole, I love you too. But marriage? Are you certain? More certain than I've been of anything since I decided to build this ranch. His eyes held hers steadily. But if you're not ready, if you need more time, I understand. The offer to stay here remains open, regardless. Tessa looked down at their joined hands, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, not to Harold Jenkins's ranch, as she had planned, but to this place, with this man who had captured her heart so unexpectedly. I came west looking for security, she said slowly. But what I found with you is so much more. It's partnership, understanding, respect. She raised her eyes to his. Yes, Cole Garrett, I will marry you. The joy that transformed his face was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. Cole pulled her to her feet and into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. When they finally separated, both breathless, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. I promise to be a good husband to you, Tessa. To honor and cherish you all the days of my life. And I promise to stand by you through whatever challenges we face, she replied, her heart full to bursting. To build a life and a home with you that's filled with love. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Riverton, with Mrs. Holloway, Timothy, granted special permission to return from school for the occasion, and a handful of neighbors in attendance. Tessa wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Everett had helped her make, with a crown of early spring flowers in her hair. As they exchanged vows, Tessa thought of that cold day at the train station when all her hopes had seemed dashed. How strange and wonderful that her greatest disappointment had led to her greatest joy. Cole, resplendent in a new black suit, spoke his vows in a clear, strong voice that carried to the rafters of the small church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small reception at the ranch afterward was filled with good wishes, hearty food, and music. Timothy darted between guests, proudly introducing Tessa as my new aunt to anyone who would listen. As evening fell, the guests departed, leaving the newly formed family alone. Mrs. Holloway, with remarkable tact, announced that she would be spending the night at her sister's house in town, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night as husband and wife. Timothy, understanding in his own way that something significant had changed, went to bed without protest after extracting promises from both Cole and Tessa that everything would be the same in the morning. Not everything, Cole murmured after the boy had gone upstairs, but all the important things. Alone at last, they stood in the parlor, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had already shared in conversation and emotion. Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett, Cole said softly, taking her hands in his. I've been home since the day you brought me here, Tessa replied, stepping into his embrace. I just didn't know it yet. Their kiss sealed more than just their wedding vows, it was a promise of the life they would build together. A life neither had expected, but both now embraced with open hearts. Over the following months, Cole successfully negotiated the purchase of the Jenkins Ranch, expanding his operation and securing their future. Tessa continued working at the millinery shop, not out of necessity now, but because she enjoyed the creative outlet and the connection to the community. When Timothy returned home for the summer, they became a true family unit, with routines and traditions that blended Cole's established ways with Tessa's fresh perspectives. The boy thrived under their combined care, his natural intelligence nurtured by Tessa's educational background, and his character shaped by Cole's steady example. By autumn, there was new joy to celebrate. Tessa was expecting their first child, due in the early spring. The news brought a depth of happiness to Cole that Tessa had glimpsed only rarely before, as if the final piece of his healing had fallen into place. One evening in late October, nearly a year after Tessa's arrival in Wyoming territory, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Cole's arm was wrapped around her waist, his hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her abdomen where their child grew. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Cole asked, his breath warm against her hair. "Often," Tessa admitted. "How close I came to a completely different life, or to no life here at all, if you hadn't been passing by when I collapsed." "I've never told you this," Cole said, turning her gently to face him. "But I wasn't just passing by. I'd gone to the station deliberately that day." Tessa looked up at him, surprised. "You had? Why?" "Harold Jenkins was my friend. When he died, I found letters from you among his papers that I was sorting for his affairs. He spoke of you with such hope and anticipation that well, I felt I owed it to him to make sure you were met and informed properly." Cole's expression grew tender. "I never expected to find the woman who would become the center of my world." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes at this revelation. "So it wasn't chance at all?" "No, not chance. Perhaps fate, or providence." Cole brushed a tear from her cheek. "Whatever it was, I thank God every day for bringing you to me, even by such a roundabout path." "As do I," Tessa whispered, leaning into his embrace, "for the man who wrapped me in his coat and gave me hope when all seemed lost." They stood together as darkness fell, two hearts that had found in each other the completion neither had known they were seeking. And as the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Tessa Garrett knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, Tessa stood on the same porch, watching as Cole taught their 4-year-old daughter, Sarah, named after his sister, to ride her first pony. Timothy, now 15 and nearly as tall as his uncle, stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. Their 2-year-old son, James, played in the dirt at Tessa's feet, occasionally looking up to wave at his father and sister. The ranch had prospered under Cole and Tessa's joint stewardship. What had once been two separate properties was now a unified operation that employed several hands and was known throughout the territory for its quality stock and fair business practices. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a dedicated schoolroom where Tessa taught not only their children, but several from neighboring ranches as well. Life in Wyoming territory remained challenging: harsh winters, occasional drought, and the ever-present unpredictability of raising cattle in frontier country, but they faced each challenge together, stronger for the partnership they had formed. As Sarah successfully completed a circle on her pony, Cole looked up and caught Tessa's eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of quickening her pulse after all these years, conveyed everything words could not: pride in their family, gratitude for their life together, and a love that had only deepened with time. Tessa raised her hand in acknowledgement, her heart full to bursting. The mail-order bride who had collapsed by the tracks had found far more than she had ever dared hope for, not just security, but true love, purpose, and a family to call her own. And it had all begun with a man who had wrapped her in his coat and hope on a cold winter day, changing the course of both their lives forever.